The 5-carat diamond hit the surface of Roman Voss's black granite desk like a bullet. The sound was sharp, final, and impossibly loud for something so small. Nora Calloway stood on the other side of that desk, with her chin lifted, her jaw locked, and her eyes burning with a fury that had been building for weeks. She was wearing her work clothes, a soft yellow dress dusted with traces of powdered sugar near the hem. Her dark hair pinned up in a practical bun, with a pencil still tucked behind her ear. She hadn't changed before coming here. She hadn't wanted to. She wanted Roman to see exactly who she was when she ended this. Not a socialite. Not a consort. A baker. Take it back, she said. And her voice only shook a little. Roman Voss did not immediately look up. He was seated behind the desk in a custom-tailored charcoal suit, reviewing something in a leather-bound file with the focused calm of a man who had never once in his life been rushed. His dark hair was swept back from a face that fashion magazines had called ruthless and beautiful in equal measure. Not that Roman Voss read fashion magazines. He read shipping manifests, court dockets, and loyalty reports. When he finally lifted his eyes to hers, Nora felt the familiar tremor move through her chest. His gaze was the color of deep water at midnight. Completely still, completely bottomless. "I don't think I caught that," he said, his voice low and measured, the faint trace of a Boston accent sharpening the consonants. "The ring." "Roman." Nora nudged the velvet box closer to his side of the desk with 2 fingers, as though she couldn't bear to touch it a second longer. "I'm giving it back. The engagement is over." Roman closed the file slowly. "Who talked?" he asked. The question wasn't what she expected, and it knocked her off her rhythm for half a second. "That's your first response. Not why. Not please. Not who talked." "Nora." She crossed her arms over her chest. The gesture was self-protective, and she knew it. And she hated knowing it. "Your men. Ricky and Saul. At the fundraiser, Thursday night. And your cousin Marlena in the coat check room. I wasn't eavesdropping. They weren't exactly whispering." She forced herself to hold his gaze. "They think I'm a joke. Roman. They think you picked me up as some kind of elaborate cover story. The sweet, plus-sized pastry chef who makes you look like a normal man with a normal life. So the feds don't look too hard at your operation." Her voice cracked on the last word. She hated that too. "I won't be your camouflage. I'm done." Roman stood. He moved around the desk with a quiet, unhurried precision that was somehow more unsettling than speed. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back slightly to hold eye contact, close enough that she could smell his cologne cedar and something darker underneath. "You think I use you?" he said. It wasn't quite a question. "I think men like you don't fall in love with women like me, unless there's a strategic reason for it." Her voice was steadier now. She had rehearsed this part. "I have stretch marks and a size 16 frame, and a business that closes at 8 p.m. I bring you day-old croissants. I'm not dangerous. Roman, I'm not an asset. And that means I'm either a prop, or I'm naive enough to be one without realizing it." Something moved behind his eyes. Brief. Violent. Carefully contained. The men who said those things. Roman said, very quietly, "will not be a concern to you going forward." "That's not the point. I know it's not." He reached out and let his thumb graze her jaw. Just once. The touch so light it barely registered. The point is that you believe them. The point is that I believed you." She stepped back, out of reach, and I can't afford to keep doing that. "The ring. Roman. Keep it. Give it to someone it makes sense on." She turned before her composure could finish disintegrating and walked toward the heavy double doors of the office. "Nora." She stopped, but didn't turn around. "Without that ring, the protection it carries disappears. It's not a gesture. It's not sentiment. Every family on the eastern seaboard knows what that stone means. The moment it leaves your finger, you become available." "Available," she repeated flatly. "Accessible. To anyone who wants to send me a message." She turned the brass handle. "I'll take my chances," she said, and walked out. She didn't look back at the ring sitting on the granite desk in its velvet box, gleaming under the cold office light. She should have looked back. 3 days passed. Nora threw herself into the rhythm of her bakery the way she always did when her personal life was in freefall obsessively, gratefully, with a ferocity that left her too physically exhausted to think. Copper Kettle Pastry occupied the ground floor of a converted brownstone on the west end of Charlestown, and it smelled, on any given morning, like browned butter, vanilla, and caramelized pear. It was the single most important thing she had ever built. It had been her sanctuary for 6 years. Her left hand felt wrong, light, in a way that was almost dizzying. She kept rubbing her ring finger without meaning to muscle memory searching for a weight that was no longer there. The black SUVs that had been quietly parked at intervals up and down her street were gone. The 2 men who had, for the past 4 months, bought almond tarts every morning with the careful cheerfulness of men pretending not to be security details. They were gone too. Roman had kept his word about that. At least, he'd pulled back entirely. Nora told herself this was what freedom felt like. She did not find it convincing. On the 3rd evening, a February ice storm moved in off the harbor just after 7 p.m., coating the streets in a hard, glassy sheen and sending the last of her customers home early. Nora locked the front door, turned the sign, and started breaking down the display cases alone. She had sent her 2 assistants home an hour earlier to beat the weather. She was humming along to a Chet Baker record on the kitchen speaker, sweeping up almond meal from beneath the prep counter, when the front window exploded inward. The sound was enormous, a concussive crack of shattering glass that knocked a tray of petit fours off the nearest shelf and sent Nora stumbling backward into the counter. A concrete block bounced once across the tile floor, scattering glass across her pristine croissant display before she could fully register what had happened. The locked front door was kicked open so hard, the frame splintered. 3 men came through it. They were not wearing the bespoke suits of Roman's organization. They wore dark field jackets, faces half obscured by the weather, and the lead man wide, thick-necked, moving with the loose swagger of someone comfortable with violence, had a tattoo on the side of his neck that Nora recognized from the one time Roman had shown her a file he probably shouldn't have. A Celtic cross overlaid with a ram's skull, the mark of the Hennessy outfit, operated out of South Boston by a man named Cillian Greer, who had reportedly been trying to take Roman Voss's harbor distribution network for 2 years. "There she is," the lead man said, his voice almost cheerful. "The baker girl." Nora's hand found the heavy marble rolling pin on the counter behind her. "Get out of my bakery," she said. Her voice was level. She was distantly proud of that. "We cut the power to your alarm system 20 minutes ago." Sweetheart. He pulled a compact pistol from his jacket. Nobody's coming. We heard a very interesting rumor. Heard you gave the big man's ring back. Walked right out of his office. He tilted his head. Mock. Sympathetic. Which means you're nobody's. Yeah, just a civilian with a little bread shop. The full weight of what Roman had told her crashed down on Nora's chest. Without that ring, the protection it carries disappears. She swung the rolling pin the moment the first man lunged. The marble caught him across the cheekbone with a crack she felt in her wrist, and he went sideways into a shelving unit, sending a cascade of ceramic ramekins across the floor. The second man grabbed her from behind, seizing a fistful of her hair and wrenching her backward off her feet. She didn't scream. She threw all her weight downward, destabilizing his grip, and drove her elbow back into his ribs with everything she had. And then she grabbed a 50-pound bag of bread flour from the lower shelf and hurled it into his face when he bent forward. The bag burst open on impact, engulfing both of them in a billowing white cloud. "Hold her," the lead man shouted, raising his weapon. The back door of Copper Kettle exploded off its hinges. The sound of suppressed gunfire, a rapid, businesslike series of muffled cracks, lasted less than 4 seconds. The man holding Nora went slack and dropped. The lead man spun and fired blindly into the flour-thick air. But a figure was already moving through the white haze faster than should have been physically possible. Roman Voss came through the cloud like a force of nature. His coat was soaked from the ice storm. His face was a mask of absolute zero. No fear. No hesitation. No expression at all. He shot the lead man twice and didn't break stride. The third man dropped his weapon and fell to his knees with his hands up, babbling. Roman ended the conversation efficiently and without ceremony. The kitchen fell silent except for the Chet Baker record, which had been playing through the entire thing. Roman dropped his weapon on the flour-coated prep counter and crossed the room in 4 strides, dropping to his knees in front of Nora, where she'd ended up sitting against the base of the pastry case. His hands were on her face before he'd fully stopped moving, turning her head, scanning her for damage. "Are you hit, Nora? Look at me. Are you hit?" "No." Her voice came out thin. She was shaking so hard, her teeth were almost chattering. "I'm not hit." He pulled her into his chest with a force that knocked the rest of the air out of her. His arms locking around her so tight, she could feel his heart hammering against her cheek. He was not calm. For the first time in the entire duration of their relationship, Roman Voss was visibly not calm. "I told you," he said into her hair, rough and low. "I told you what the ring meant. You let them." She pushed against his chest, fury flooding in over the top of the fear. "You pulled your protection to teach me a lesson. I had 14 men on this block." His eyes cut to hers, and they were raw, in a way she had never seen. They were ambushed in the parking structure, 2 buildings over. This was coordinated. Nora, Greer planned this the moment word got out, that you'd left. He reached into his coat and withdrew the velvet box. He opened it. The diamond was a cold, tout brillant, unwavering point of light in the ruined, flour-white bakery. "Look at this ring," Roman said. "Not at me. At the ring." She looked. "It belonged to my mother, Eleanor. She ran the entire Northeast operation for 11 years before she handed it to me. She wasn't a decorative woman. She was built." He paused, and something cracked slightly in his voice. "Exactly the way you are. Substantial, grounded. The kind of presence that changes the weight of a room when she walks in. He turned the ring in the light. The band is custom. It was cast to her hand. It cannot be resized. The metalwork doesn't allow it. My mother commissioned it that way deliberately. She said a ring that could be worn by any woman was a ring that meant nothing. He looked at Nora. No one in my world has ever been able to wear it. I had it with me for 3 years before I met you. 3 years of carrying it around like an obligation I couldn't fulfill. His voice dropped lower. When I put it on your finger, Nora, it fit. That doesn't happen. It was never going to happen with anyone else. Nora stared at him. Ricky and Sal, she said. You're men who laughed at me. Roman's expression didn't change. They have been addressed. Addressed. They won't be a problem. The cold certainty in his voice sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the ice storm blowing in through the shattered front window. She understood, in a way she hadn't fully allowed herself to before. Exactly what addressed meant. In Roman Voss's vocabulary, she should have felt horror. What she felt was something more complicated than that. Something that frightened her about herself. No one has ever defended me like that. She said quietly, no one ever will again. Roman replied, with the absolute conviction of a man stating a physical law, except me. 6 days later, Nora was staying at Roman's estate in Greenwich, less a house than a compound. Set behind iron gates and dense hemlock hedges. Staffed around the clock and locked down since the attack. She was dressed in a borrowed silk robe, the color of deep burgundy. Seated at the long dining table in the sunlit east room, staring at the velvet box that had been following her like a conscience. She hadn't put the ring back on yet. She was working through it. The enormity of what she was being asked to step into. The irreversibility of it. The doors to the east room opened, and Marlena walked in. Marlena Voss was 34, and looked like she had been assembled by committee, specifically to make other women feel inadequate. She was sharp-angled, impeccably dressed in a winter-white blazer, carrying a silver tray with a teapot and 2 porcelain cups, as though she were performing an act of charity. Nora, darling. Marlena set the tray down, her eyes cutting immediately to the velvet box. What a terrible ordeal. I came the moment I was allowed. A drive-by shooting at your little shop. You must be completely shattered. Nora went very still. She set down her own cup slowly. A drive-by, she said. The Hennessy boys. Apparently. Driving past and shooting the windows out. Marlena shook her head, pouring the tea with the practiced sympathy of someone who had rehearsed the expression. This is exactly why I've always worried about you in this world. Nora, you're too gentle for it. Honestly, this might be the universe telling you to take your things and go back to your normal life. Nora looked at her for a long moment. It wasn't a drive-by, she said. Her voice was quiet and absolutely steady. They cut the alarm, kicked the door in, and came inside. 3 men. Roman hasn't shared the details of the attack with anyone outside of his head of security, specifically to keep people calm and prevent information from leaking, while they investigate how Greer's men knew my alarm schedule and my staff's departure time. She tilted her head. The news hasn't been released, so how do you know it was the Hennessy outfit? The teapot in Marlena's hand jerked. Hot tea sloshed across the polished table. The carefully maintained expression of sympathetic concern peeled back like a mask being torn off. And what was underneath was not grief or embarrassment. It was hatred. Pristina. Sharpened. Long-cultivated hatred. You have no idea what you are, Marlena said. And her voice had gone from soft to surgical. You waltz in here with your little pastry boxes and your ridiculous body, and you think you belong at this table. Roman is blind. He's lost his mind over you, and he can't see what the rest of us can see, that you are an embarrassment to this family. Greer promised me it would be clean. You wouldn't suffer. And in exchange, I gave him the harbor scheduling routes. She straightened her blazer. I was protecting the family's reputation. I was doing what Roman can't bring himself to do because he's too busy being infatuated. Before Marlena could reach for the structured handbag beside her chair, the doors to the east room opened behind her. Roman stood in the doorway. His head of security, a broad, scar-faced man named Garrett, flanked him on the left, Roman's face. When Nora had first started falling for him, had looked dangerous in a distant, abstract way, the danger of a man who operated in a world she didn't fully understand. Now she watched him look at his cousin across the room, and she understood that the distance she'd always perceived had been him choosing to maintain it. When he dropped it, the danger was immediate and total and absolutely specific. He had heard everything. Marlena took a step backward, and her heel caught the leg of the chair. Roman, listen to me. She's not. She doesn't understand this world. She's going to get you killed. The people who didn't understand their place, Roman said, in a tone that was completely uninflected and therefore more frightening than shouting, have been managed. He didn't look at Marlena again. His eyes were on Nora. I was waiting, he said quietly, for my Donna to make her first move. Nora looked at Marlena, at the brittle hatred, the desperate performance of elitism, the violence she had arranged from behind a silver tea service. Then she looked down at the velvet box on the table. She had spent the last week telling herself she was deciding, but she understood now that she had already decided. She'd decided the moment she grabbed a marble rolling pin, instead of running for the back door. She'd decided when she took Roman's hand in the flour-covered wreckage of her bakery and let him lead her out. She had simply been waiting for the right moment to show it. Nora reached into the box. The platinum band was cold and impossibly heavy, and exactly the right weight. She slid it onto her ring finger, and it settled into place with the absolute precision of something that had been designed for this and only this. She looked at Garrett. Take Marlena to wherever you take people who betray this family, she said. Her voice didn't shake at all. And contact Greer's organization. Let them know the Voss family is returning their associate's message. In pieces. No, Roman. Please. Marlena's voice rose to something between a scream and a sob as Garrett and a second man took her by the arms and moved her firmly toward the door. Her stiletto heels dragged lines across the hardwood floor. The doors closed behind her, and her voice disappeared down the corridor. And then there was silence. Roman walked to the head of the table. He stopped in front of Nora, and then he did something she would remember for the rest of her life. Roman Voss, who had never bent a knee to anyone, lowered himself onto one knee in front of her chair. He took her left hand in both of his and pressed his mouth to the top of the platinum band, and then to her knuckles, and his eyes, when they rose to meet hers, were the eyes of a man who had been waiting a very long time for something he'd stopped believing existed. Mi donna, he said quietly. Nora looked down at the man kneeling before her, the most feared operator on the eastern seaboard, a man who moved governments and ended careers and had just watched his own cousin be dragged out of a room on Nora's word, and she felt the last of the old version of herself settle and dissolve. She was not a prop. She was not camouflage. She was not a woman who needed to make herself smaller, so the world felt more comfortable with her presence. She was the woman his mother's ring had been waiting for. She had gravity. Roman had said. She anchored him. Nora Calloway. Pastry chef. Size 16. To flower, still occasionally in her hair at inopportune moments. Placed her free hand on the side of Roman Voss's face. Get up, she said. We have work to do. He smiled. Small. Real. And a little dangerous, and stood. And the woman who had walked into a crime lord's office to return a ring walked out of that room as something the Voss organization had not had in 11 years. A donna. And every family from Boston to Baltimore would feel the difference